Nanotechnology Council and IIT Indore. First of all, I deeply regret for the yesterday's inconvenience faced by all the participants. Our sponsor for the today's presentation are Excel Instrument, Zagatech Corporation, Rudraksh Technologies, Bansha Vacuum Technologies, Streamline, and Optimized Solution. Now I invite Bhanu Pratap Dhamnia to start with his lecture. Bhanu, please start. Participants, you are requested to keep the audio in mute mode during the talk and inquire the doubt after the end of the session. You may post your queries in chat box during the talk. Bhanu, you may proceed.
Thank you, madam. Good morning, all. I am Bhanu, and I will be talking on the perovskite solar cells, their degradation mechanism, and some efforts that we have made in improving the stability of the perovskite solar cells. So, in the current market, there are a few mature existing photovoltaic technologies present. Like we have silicon solar cells that has acquired around 95% of the market. We have gallium arsenide based solar cell technologies which have acquired the space industry. And in the third generation solar cells, we have CIGS and cadmium telluride based solar cells which are ready to go from laboratory scale to commercialization. But if you see any technologies to be persistent or to be commercially viable, there has to be these three factors that should to be considered. If you take any technology, the performance should be good enough, and it should be stable for a reasonable amount of time, and the cost should be marginable, so that the people can use it for their societal purposes or some other purposes can be useful. If you talk about the silicon solar cells, the performance wise, if you talk about the silicon solar cells, the performance has increased to around 23 to 24%, which is very good in terms of the photovoltaic technologies, and it shows a stability of around 10 to 15 years, which is a very good lifetime. But when it comes to the cost, it's very costly, and that's the reason that nowadays we are not able to use it for our household purposes on a regular basis, because its cost is quite high. If you talk about the cost of the photovoltaic technologies or the silicon technologies, the most of the cost is due to the processing cost. When you have a raw silicon, you have to convert the raw silicon into the metallurgical grade silicon, and the metallurgical grade silicon should be converted into silicon solar, which is the correct form of the silicon to be used for the solar cell processes. And after that, the silicon solar cell form has to be converted into the wafer. So this entire process takes up around 40% of the processing cost. So obviously now we need to search for some other materials, absorber materials, which are cost effective, so that we can reduce the overall pricing of the solar cells. So in the new photovoltaic technologies, perovskite has shown a very good future for the solar photovoltaic technologies, and that is because it offers some great advantage with it. It has a very easy fabrication process. If what you need to do is you just need to take some chemicals, you mix them in some solvent, and you spread it over your substrate, and you give some temperature annealing, and then perovskite is ready. Obviously, it uses some lead halide salts and some solvents, so the cost is very low because the cost of material itself is very low. In a few thousands rupees, you can get all the lead halide salts and the solvents. So it's very cost effective in that scenario. And the third one, and the most important one, is the photovoltaic properties of the solar cell of this perovskite. As you see in this figure, the perovskite show a much higher or much better absorption coefficient than the silicon solar cell in the visible region. And it has it provides a very good diffusion length to the charge carriers, which gives sufficient time to extract the charge carriers completely. It has an ambipolar transport facility. It means that it can transport both electron as well as holes without much discrepancies. And among all, the most important is the band gap tunability also. So by changing the band gap of the perovskite material, you can use it for some other applications like LEDs and photodetectors also. And the band gap of the perovskite can be varied entirely from taking the blue region to the red reason, and even with this material you can make a white LED also, which is very difficult to make in the optoelectronic field. So let's understand what is perovskite. Perovskite is just a family name. So it is a family name of the material which is like discovered in 18th century. The basic examples of this material is calcium titanate or barium titanate, which are famous for their dielectric and ferroelectric properties. But the materials that we are using is somewhat different. The material, different material, which is of the regular perovskite. The calcium and barium titanate materials are good for their ferroelectric properties, but they are not suitable for the optoelectronic properties. So what we need to do is to make the perovskite is of our interest. We substitute the A side cation with some organic inorganic cations, B side cation with some heavy metals, and X side with anions like iodine, bromine, and chlorine. If you see the structure, this is the basic cubic structure of the perovskite, where A side is taken at the corners, B side is on the body center position, and X or anions are at the face center positions. Now the question is, can we use any of the material for this A or B or X side position? The answer is we have to take care of the tolerance factor. To make a good perovskite or perovskite of optoelectronic quality, then we have to take care that the perovskite tolerance factor should be between 0.8 to 1. This is the range where perovskite is optoelectronically active. So if you choose any range of the radius of A, B, and X side cations, which governs the tolerance factor, then it should be between 0.8 to 1, and for a better performance it should be around between 0.9 to 1, which is the cubic phase of the perovskite, which is the most symmetric phase of the perovskite. So if you are changing the cation position or anion position, then it should not differ from this range. Otherwise it will be non it will not show any good photophysical properties, and your solar cell device will not be a good device. If you substitute the A side cation with methyl ammonium, the B side cation with lead, and X side cation with iodine, then it makes a MePbI3 perovskite, which is the basic perovskite among all. And this is the perovskite which has been highly researched for understanding all the scientific properties of the perovskite. And by understanding this MePbI3 perovskite, the properties can be governed or can be extrapolated to other perovskites as well. So in our presentation also, for understanding the degradation mechanism we are going to use this perovskite only. So before understanding the degradation mechanism of the perovskite, first we have to understand the bonding chemistry of the perovskite. The bonding in the perovskite structure is basically considered as the interaction among the three molecules. The first one is the interaction between lead and the iodine is governed by the partial ionic, partial covalent bond. The second one is the interaction between this methyl ammonium and the nearby methyl ammonium, which can be present here, is governed by the dipole-dipole interaction. And the third one is the interaction between this methyl ammonium and this PbI6 octahedra is governed by the hydrogen bonding. So overall, there are three types of bonding present in the perovskite. One is the partial ionic, partial covalent character. The second one is the the dipole-dipole interaction, and the third one is the hydrogen bonding. If you see the band structure of the perovskite, the valence band is contributed by the hybridization of 6s orbitals of the lead and p orbitals of the halogen, whereas the conduction band is contributed due to the unoccupied empty orbitals of lead, 6p orbitals of lead. So if you see here, the A side cation is electronically inactive. It doesn't show any contribution in governing the band structure of the perovskite, but it plays a very important role in changing the band gap of the perovskite also. It is not electronically active, but if you change the rotation of this methyl ammonium, or it's little bit, give it to a tilt or something, then it will overall affect the perovskite structure. And if perovskite structure is affected, then its symmetry will be changed. And once you change the symmetry of the structure, then obviously the band gap is going to be changed. So it is not electronically active, but it has a very important role in governing the band gap of the perovskite. Let's understand the perovskite solar cells. We need a few layers to be deposited along with the perovskite absorber to make it a solar cell. For considering a planar NIP structure, we have a conducting glass. Over that, we deposit some compact electron transport layer, which is used for the collection of the electron. The possible examples for this electron transport materials are titanium dioxide, tin oxide. Then over the electron transport materials, we have a perovskite, which is absorber layer, which will be generating the electron hole pairs. Then to extract the holes, we have hole transporting materials, which is mostly the organic materials like spirometad or PTAA. But if you are talking about the inorganic hole transporting material, then the molybdenum oxide is nowadays a good option. Then to have a counter electrode, we generally use gold or silver or copper. If you see the scanning electron microscopy image of the perovskite solar cell, the compact TiO2 layer can be varied to around 6 nanometers to 80 nanometers. The perovskite layer varies from around 300 to 700 nanometers depending on the perovskite type that you are using. And the hole transporting material varies around 150 nanometers. And the gold electrode is of around 60 to 70 nanometers. So this is the typical thicknesses which is used in the solar cells. Now, if you illuminate this perovskite solar cell, then there will be generation of electron and hole pairs depending on the band gap of the solar cell. These electrons from the conduction band will obviously see a downhill and act as a water molecules like flowing water kind of thing. It will see a downhill and it will be collected at the energy level. The electrode FTO. The holes in this case acts as a bubble and it will be collected at the gold electrode through hole transporting materials. So this is the basic working of the perovskite solar cell. Now we have some of the good advantages associated with the perovskite solar cells, but still this technology is not in a commercially recognized field because it has some challenges, some issues like degradation of the perovskite. If you see, remember this Venn diagram, its performance is very good. It has shown up to around 25.5% of efficiency. It has reasonable cost because of the low cost of the raw material. But if you talk about the stability, it is not very much stable on the operating environment. There are so many factors like water, temperature, oxygen, even the light which is used for illuminating the solar cell can degrade the perovskite solar cells. The degradation in the perovskite is its fundamental issue. And why is that? Because it's a salt. If you consider example of any salt, like our day-to-day life salt, NaCl, if you put it outside the environment, if you put it in the environment, then after some time it starts behaving soggy. It starts acting like a soggy or dissolving into with that water. So the water is a strong polar molecule. So whenever any salts come in interaction with the water, the water molecules, because of its polar strength, start dissociating the salt molecules, and immediately the structure starts disintegrating. The second obvious reason for MEPBI3 perovskite is its organic part. The organic part, which is methylammonium, is very hygroscopic in nature. So it had a tendency to attract the water itself. And the third reason, as we discussed earlier, is the weaker bonds. We have dipole-dipole interactions and we have hydrogen bonding, which is a weak van der Waals forces and very easy to break with some external perturbations. So these are the basic fundamental issue which governs the degradation in the perovskite. If you talk about the factors affecting the degradation of the perovskite, then the perovskite material is very sensitive towards temperature also. The structure of the perovskite contains methylammonium, which is the organic part and has a volatile nature, and even the halide also has volatile nature. So if you give some heat which is like more than 85 degrees or 90 degrees to a longer time, then it starts disintegrating because of the volatile character of iodine as well as the methylammonium contained. Even the sunlight also can degrade the perovskite. When the perovskite is in illumination conditions, what happens is iodine molecules and these cation molecules started migrating away from the sunlight and started collecting. This ion segregation leaves some vacancies behind. So if you you imagine if the iodine or the methylammonium cation is getting segregated at one place, then obviously the perovskite structure is going to disintegrate or distorted. So eventually, after some time, it started degrading in the sunlight. Even the oxygen degradation, even the oxygen can degrade the perovskite structure, but this oxygen has no much effect in degrading the perovskite under dark condition. But when it is coming in the combination with sunlight, it has very detrimental effect on the perovskite structure. If you see here, these iodine vacancies, these vacancies are present in the case of sunlight exposure. And in the oxygen exposure also, the oxygen can take up these vacancies. So once the oxygen comes to this vacancy here, it starts eating up the charges. And not only the charges, it starts deprotonization of the methylammonium molecule. So once the deprotonization starts, it acts as an acid-base reaction mechanism. And as an outcome of the acid-base reaction mechanism, the byproducts are water and the lead iodide. So it's like it starts disintegration of the perovskite, and eventually the perovskite starts degrading. Now, among all these factors, as we discussed earlier also, the moisture is the most important degrading factor. There has been some of the degradation mechanism reported in governing the degradation mechanism due to the humidity. Like some says that the perovskite can disintegrate into the lead iodide and MAI, and some says that it goes through a hydration step. So there has been some reports, but still there is a lack of understanding on governing the degradation mechanism of perovskite. So in this direction, we have also given our theory to understand the degradation mechanism of the perovskite. But before starting the degradation of the perovskite, let's understand the fabrication methods of the perovskite. We have several fabrication methods. Some are the chemical based and some are the physical based deposition systems. In the chemical deposition systems, we have inkjet printing, screen printing, spray coating, and slot die coater to deposit the perovskite. But all these methods are good for fabrication of perovskite on a large scale. The physical deposition process is not of very much interest since it provides a very good quality of perovskite, but is associated with some cost because of use of thermal evaporators or some other kind of physical techniques which is involved in very heavy machinery and the cost. So if you are going to study the perovskite on a laboratory basis, the most important technique which is used is a spin coating technique, because it's a very easy technique. You just need some precursor, drop it on the substrate and anneal it. Even the annealing has been made very easy nowadays. Earlier, like, people still uses the hot plate, but if you use the hot plate, people need to anneal it for around 30 to 40 minutes to get a good perovskite structure. But few group in China has reported that even if you take the after depositing the perovskite, you can put it in the under the microwave for 30 seconds and your perovskite is ready, which is and if you compare this perovskite, microwave annealed perovskite, with the hot plate annealed perovskite, the microwave annealed perovskite shows a better morphological or better crystallization structures. So it has been a very easy nowadays to use this process for fabrication. For going a little deep into the spin coating process, since we will be using this for our entire presentation, the spin coating process can be of two types. Like, one is the single step deposition technique, where the lead salt, which is generally PbI2, and the methylammonium iodide is dissolved in a DMF, dimethyl formamide, and a precursor solution has been prepared. This precursor solution is spreaded over the substrate, generally the glass or conducting glass, using a spin coating technique. And when you anneal it for some temperature at around 100 degree for around 30 minutes, then it gives a very good perovskite. The second technique in the spin coating is two-step or sequential deposition technique. Unlike the first step deposition technique, where you can obtain a direct MEPBI3 perovskite, here the first step is deposition of the lead iodide layer. Here, PbI2 and MAI both are dissolved in DMF. Instead, here only PbI2 is dissolved in the DMF and a precursor solution is being prepared. Now this PbI2, which is in DMF solution, is spreaded over a substrate and annealed it for some time. This annealing gives a PbI2 film. Now this PbI2 film can be deposited in this MEI solution, which is prepared by using IPA as the solvent, and the perovskite can be converted. From this PbI2 film, you can convert the perovskite from two ways. One is similar to the first step, you can take the spin coating as a process. Second is you take the PBI2 film, dip it into the solution, take it out after some optimized 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes of time, and anneal it for some time, and your perovskite will be ready. So these are the two basic processing techniques used in spin coating. We have also used these two methods only to understand the degradation mechanism in our studies. So what we have used is, first is the lead chloride route, where we have used methylammonium iodide, and instead of lead, instead we have used the chloride as a salt, lead chloride as a salt, which gives MaPbI3 structure. The second, we have used lead acetate route, where we have used lead acetate as the lead salt instead of lead chloride, and it gives MaPbI3 structure. And the third one is the two-step deposition route, where we have used lead iodide as a salt. All these three routes give the standard MaPbI3 structure, although their byproducts are different, but the structure is same MaPbI3. I mean, the compound is perovskite. And these three films, which are deposited from these three routes, are put under a degradation conditions like relative humidity of around 70 to 80% inside a room. We wanted to avoid direct sunlight, since we don't want to study the oxygen degradation and the light degradation studies. So we put it under and inside a room, and in 70 to 80% of RH in the normal temperature range. And we have done some basic characterizations on these films. If you see the absorption analysis for the lead chloride root film, the absorption of the lead chloride root film has degraded to around 60% within just 4 hours. And in 24 hours, it has gone to 80% of degradation. So, but if you compare this lead chloride route absorption with the lead acetate and a two-step route, the degradation is very less. Even after 24 hours, there is a very less degradation in both these absorptions. Even in the case of the two-step, if you see very closely, there is a little improvement in the absorption of the perovskite. The second observation here is, if you see in this magnified image, there is shift in the absorption edge. If you see here, when you are aging it for some time, with the aging time, there is shift in the absorption. Up to 24 hours, it shows some kind of perovskite phase, but after 24 hours, the absorption onset goes to around 450 nanometers. Then after some time, for a prolonged aging, this absorption edge shifted to around 500 nanometers here. But in case of lead acetate route and the two-step route, the absorption edge is at around 500 nanometer in both the cases, and it takes a lot of time to degrade. So this was some difference in the absorption analysis that we have got from for this lead chloride route. And we have calculated the decay rate. If you see the decay rate for lead chloride route, it degrades very fast. Even if you take that for 30% of the degradation in absorbance, it takes only 2 hours. But in case of lead acetate and two-step film, it takes around 40-45 hours to degrade to 30% of the absorbance. So from here, we can say that the chloride route is degrading very faster. To have a better confidence on this observation, we did the luminescence studies as well. If you see that even after 24 hours itself, the lead chloride film is photoactive, is not at all photoactive. But in case of lead acetate and two-step route, it shows photoactivity even after 2 to 3 days or 4 days also. So clearly, the lead chloride route was degrading faster. Then we implemented the same films, all these three films in a perovskite device. We used TiO2 as a electron transporting layer and PTAA as a hole transporting material. And with this device, we came to understand that even in the device itself also, the perovskite is degrading faster. And even after 400 of exposure, even after 100 hours, the perovskite of the lead chloride route has degraded significantly, but the other two routes shows significant efficiency. The degradation in the perovskite device efficiency comes due to degradation in the current. If you see in this figure, the current has been degrading so fast for lead chloride route film, because once you put the film or the device into the humid environment, the perovskite starts disintegrating and the amount of the perovskite is going to be lower. So if you reduce the amount of the absorber material, then overall the current generation will be reduced. So it is governed by basically the degradation in the current. To have a better understanding, we have done the diffraction analysis for all these three films. If you see here, this peak, which is around 14 degree, is the signature peak of the perovskite. So if you keep it under humidity exposure, after some time it starts degrading. Even after 4 hours for lead chloride route, if you can see it here in the magnified image, there is a little signature for some other peak, and it starts increasing with the aging time, and suddenly after some time it converts into some other 2-3 peaks, which shows the formation of the perovskite hydration. These peaks correspond to the formation of the perovskite hydration, where the peak which is around 7 degree or 8 degree is the monohydrate phase of the perovskite, and the peak here which is around 10 degree is the double hydrate phase of the perovskite. So if you see here, there has been some other form of perovskite which is forming when you are keeping this perovskite under humidity exposure. But the same is not happening with other two routes. Here, the perovskite, after a long time of aging, is degrading directly into the lead iodide, which is one of its constituting element. And in the two-step route also, it is directly degrading into the lead iodide. We didn't observe any signature of perovskite hydration formation in acetate precursor route and two-step precursor routes. The hydration of the perovskite in chloride route has been confirmed by the IR spectroscopy as well. If you see it around 3300 nanometers, there is a very big shoulder here. That this shoulder represents the oxygen-hydrogen stretching, which shows the hydrogen bonding, some kind of hydrogen bonding in the perovskite material with some external, factor. And the same, this shoulder has not been observed in two-step route and lead acetate route, which shows clearly that there is no hydration present in two-step route and the lead acetate route. And also the IR spectroscopy also favors the same degradation process. This lead chloride route degrades faster and these two comparatively slower. So from all these observations, we understood that the lead chloride route is degrading much faster and it goes through a hydration mechanism as compared to the counterpart processes. So now the question is why it is happening? Why the lead chloride route is going to some different way, whereas the other two routes are going some other way, although the perovskite is same in both the processes. To understand this, if you see the some literature, it reports that the degradation of perovskite is governed by the size of the perovskite crystals or the grain size of the perovskites. So if you have a smaller grain size, the degradation will be faster. But if you have a large grain size, the degradation will be slower. So to understand this, we have done some scanning electron microscopic images for our films. But what we observed, the result is exactly opposite to this theory. The lead chloride route films was showing very good grain size ranging around 1 micrometers. But in case of two-step and lead acetate route, the grain size was small, it's around 100 nanometers. So ideally, if you go through this theory, this route should be degrading very slow and this should be degrading very fast. But in our case, this is degrading very fast and this is degrading very slow. So it means that there is something more happening than the grain size. So to understand this degradation process, we have closely observed the diffraction patterns of these three films. If you see the diffraction patterns of lead chloride precursor route, it shows a very good cubic symmetry. Like it has 100 peak, 200 peak, and then 300 peak. So it's a very good cubic symmetry with most of the crystal orientation aligned in 100 directions. But in this, if you see the two-step route and acetate precursor route, the symmetry is little distorted. Here it is showing 110 alignment, 220, and some other peaks also. So it shows that it's not a perfect cubic structure. It moves toward a tetragonal structure. So we have done some structural analysis using some software, and we know that most of the arrangement here is in 100 position, and here most of the arrangement in 110 position. Also, if you look closely, here there are some additional peaks. There is 1213 peak and 1211 peak. these are two signature diffractions which comes from the tetragonal phase, and these two signature diffraction peaks are not present in the cubic phase. So this confirms that this goes to a tetragonal phase, whereas the lead chloride precursor route goes for a cubic phase. Also, when we did the lattice parameter calculation, we came to know that the lead chloride forms a perfect cubic phase with lattice parameters of 6.3 angstrom, and lead acetate and two-step routes forms a tetragonal phase with 8.8 and 12.65 around lattice parameters. So this confirms that the phase difference, there is a phase difference between all the between the lead chloride and lead acetate and two-step routes. The phase confirmation can also be done from the absorption analysis. If you see the top plot of the these two films, there is a slight increase in the band gap of the two-step route. This increase in the band gap comes due to symmetry. So as I have told earlier, when there is a decrease in the symmetricity of any structure, there has to be some kind of change in the band gap. So here in case of the perovskite, if the symmetry is changing, symmetry is reducing from cubic to tetragonal, then there will be a slight change in the band gap. The band gap will be little bit higher for the tetragonal phase. So with all these observations, we came to know very confidently that there is a difference in the perovskite structure crystallization. And we thought that we speculated that there can be some reason, this can be some reason for having, different degradation processes in the perovskite films. Now the question is why this first route, lead chloride route, is going for a cubic phase, whereas the other two routes are going for the tetragonal phase. So in the lead chloride route, we have used PbCl2 as a precursor. This PbCl2 is not directly making the MaPbI3. First, it makes a MaPbCl3 intermediate phase. This MaPbCl3 has a perfectly cubic structure, and from this MaPbCl3, formation of MaPbI3 happens through a halide exchange reaction. This halide exchange reaction is very slow in process. It takes around 2 to 2.5 hours of temperature annealing at 100 degrees centigrade to form a perfect MaPbI3 structure. So when you anneal it for a longer time at 100 degrees centigrade or little bit, 90 to 100 degrees centigrade, then what happens is this chloride starts going out from the crystal structure and iodine starts replacing the chloride. And finally, there will be a MaPbI3 structure at the end of complete crystallization process. So here the complete process is governed through intermediate phase, and this is the reason this intermediate phase is one of the reason for governing the large grains in this perovskite formation. Now we understood that the deposition methods governs to a different kind of crystal orientations. So let's have understanding on the dissociation mechanism for all these methods. So if we go for lead chloride route, we understood that there is a 100 arrangement for the crystal orientation. So if you see the 100 arrangement, the methyl ammonium part for this arrangement will be on the top or will be exposed towards the moisture, towards the environment, whereas the lead halide part will be at the bottom. So this part already is very hygroscopic in nature. So once the moisture attacks, it starts making some kind of bonding with methyl ammonium. Why? Because the H2 is a polar solvent. This is also polar in nature, so it can make a hydrogen bonding here itself. And this hydrogen bonding is shown in the FTIR spectra as well. But as we know that this bonding is hydrogen bonding. So the property of the hydrogen bonding is in such a way that it can have a more than bonds at a time. But when you increase the concentration of H2O molecules here, it starts taking up the methylamine, because this bonding is more preferable because of the hygroscopic nature of the methyl ammonium, and eventually this bond between methyl ammonium and the PbI2 starts breaking off. Once after some time, even between 2 to 4 hours or some time depending on the perovskite, this bonds break and methyl ammonium goes with the H2O, and what we have is the PbI2 only. So in this process, we know that it goes through a hydration mechanism. For some time, the hydrogen will be in the perovskite structure, and eventually it will be a lead iodide. The final byproduct will be the lead iodide. If we see for other two steps as well, the structure is oriented in 110 orientation. For this orientation, the PbI6 octahedra is towards the facing environment. So this PbI6 is an inorganic part. So this plays, some kind. This shows some kind of resistivity towards the moisture ingress. So it takes a lot of time for the water molecule to penetrate the structure as compared to lead chloride route. But eventually, for a longer time of exposure, the H2O molecules starts breaking the bonds of this PbI6 octahedra. But this breaking of bond of PbI6 octahedra doesn't happen at once. What happens is it's like a very slow process. One water molecule will come and try to bond with this PbI6, and eventually this will start dissociating or dissolving the iodine one by breaking its bond, and one H2O molecule will take place of one iodine. So this formation is called the Plumbate formation, where the iodine is replaced with H2O molecules. And eventually, when the concentration is very high after a prolonged aging, then most of the iodine bonds are breaked with the PbI2 with PbI6 octahedra, and what we left with is PbI2. So if you see in both the cases, the final byproduct is PbI2 only, but the process through which it follows the degradation is completely different in both the process. If you see the degradation route here, if we take the lead chloride route, under the exposure of small amount of H2O, it goes through a monohydrate phase formation. This monohydrate phase formation can be seen from this film as well. The white part in this film shows some kind of hydration itself. And after some time of aging of around 24 hours or something, this monohydrate phase, when it has a high amount of H2O, starts converting into dihydrate phase. And after some time, when the water molecules or MAI is evaporated, it converts into the PbI2. So this yellow portion in this film shows the PbI2, which is the color of lead iodide. But in case of two-step route and acetate route, it directly goes through the lead iodide film. If you see here, after 24 hours, there is no significant improvement degradation can be seen in the perovskite films. But after a prolonged exposure of around 3 days or 4 days, you can see a clear white color of lead iodide. Here the color is not clear to show the PbI2, because some kind of water is still there in the structure, and some PbI2 has been already dissolved with water. So you cannot see a clear PbI2 color here, but here it is clearly visible. So this is how the degradation is happening. The degradation rate and the degradation mechanism is going on between all these three routes. So from these observations, we came to know that the crystal orientation of the perovskite films plays a very crucial role in governing the moisture stability of the perovskite. And we identified from here that two-step route is having some kind of resistivity itself for the degradation. It degrades a little bit slower due to its inherent nature of the perovskite and PbI2 on the top surface, which acts as some protecting element for some time. So out of this results, we understood that two-step is degrading very slow, but there has been some issues with the two-step process as well. It doesn't have that much of high performance because of its poor morphology. The perovskite here is of poor morphology. You see here the grain size is very small, and you can see here some pinholes also. So all these morphologies, small grains and pinholes and incomplete coverage in the perovskite film gives a compromisation in the performance. To have a better performing perovskite, all you need to have is a perovskite film with a very large grain size and with a very high quality grain. The better the coverage, the better the grain size, the better the crystallization or the compact nature of the perovskite, it gives a higher performance. But if the grain size are smaller and it has pinholes in this one, then there will be some stunting path provided in the perovskite film, and it will lead to a degradation, decrease in the performance of the perovskite. So what we did is we tried to improve we tried to further improve the two-step performance as well as the stability of the two-step route. So if you see the degradation, the formation mechanism for the two-step, first the lead iodide film is prepared from the PbI2 solutions. If we do some characterization on the lead iodide films, we came to know that lead iodide film itself has a very poor morphology and crystallization. And the MAI and the perovskite which is formed from this lead iodide film goes through a intercalation process. If you take this PbI2 film, you put MAI molecules on the top of that PbI2 film, then eventually the perovskite is formed by taking the PbI2 structure as the base structure. So as good as the PbI2 structure, the good will be perovskite. So we thought, why don't we improve the PbI2 film structure itself so that we can have a better perovskite phase? In this method, what we did is, generally we are using a direct annealing process of lead iodide film. We spread the lead iodide film on the substrate and we annihilate at the 70 degrees centigrade, which gives a lead iodide film. If you annihilate directly, it gives this kind of structure, this kind of crystallization. We thought of changing some temperature profiling. We introduced some higher temperature annealing, where there is a gradual increase in the temperature, and for some time there will be the temperature will be constant for have a proper crystallization, and it will be cooled at ambient temperature so that the strain and stresses from the PbI2 film can be removed. So this gives a very compact, a very good morphology on the lead iodide film, which eventually can lead to a very good perovskite. So out of it, we came to know that the perovskite, which is annealed at the 70 degrees centigrade, and the PbI2, which is annealed at the 70 degrees centigrade, has this kind of morphology. But if we anneal it at a higher temperature, in our case, we annealed it at up to 300 degrees centigrades, out of which 200 degrees centigrade gives a better performance, and this shows this kind of PbI2 morphology. If you see here, there are hardly any pinholes visible in this structure. And if you convert this PbI2 into perovskite, this is the difference here. This this perovskite is showing a very compact morphology, and it's very hard to see the grain boundaries even in this morphology with using the SEM. If you see the luminescence in both the perovskite films, the perovskite which is formed by annealing the PbI2 at 200 degrees centigrades gives a very good photoluminescence as compared to the perovskite which is made by using PbI2 at 70 degrees centigrade. Not only the morphological properties, the optoelectronic properties of the perovskite has been improved significantly. If you see the absorption here, the perovskite which is at 70 degrees centigrade shows little less absorbance. By using the 200 degree annealing lead iodide, the absorbance in the perovskite has been improved due to improved surface coverage in the perovskite film. And the lifetime of the perovskite film, the charge carriers in the perovskite has been improved significantly. We have observed on almost 10 times increase in the perovskite lifetime when you use the lead iodide film annealed at 200 degrees centigrades. We have done some capturing of fluorescence using some confocal microscopy, and we came to know that the fluorescence density throughout the film has been increased significantly. If you see, as compared to perovskite film, which is prepared at 70 degree PbI2, the fluorescence density is very low, whereas the fluorescence density for 200 degree annealed film is around 2.5 into 10 to the power 7, which is more than twice as compared to this film. This exhibits that there are very significant amount of defective states has been reduced in the perovskite structure for this film, and this reduction in the perovskite defects can lead to non-radiative recombination and can give the increase in the emission process. The same perovskite films has been implemented into the device, and we have observed a significant increase in the JV efficiency for the perovskite film which is prepared at 200 degrees centigrades. We saw that the perovskite efficiency has been increased from 4% to approximately 13%. And we kept these devices under ambient conditions at 60% relative humidity, and we saw that the perovskite film which is prepared at 70 degrees centigrades has been almost degraded within around 100 to 120 of hours. But the perovskite which is prepared at 200 degrees centigrade has been retaining more than 90% of efficiency even after 400 hours of exposure. So it shows that there is a significant improvement in the stability of the perovskite films prepared by the two-step if we use at elevated annealing temperatures of the lead iodide film. So this was the one approach that we have used to improve the two-step methodology. Now the next approach that we have used is the change in the precursor compositions. So what we tried is we did change the PBI2 morphology by changing the precursor composition of the PBI2 itself. Earlier, we were using only PBI2. In this case, we have introduced some amount of lead nitrate as well. So we have used some kind of volumetric ratios for PBI2 and lead nitrate and made a precursor solution. The volumetric ratio is varying from 90% of PBI2 to and 10% of lead nitrate to 60% of PBI2 and 40% of lead nitrate. We have made the PBI2 film using these precursor solutions. What this lead nitrate is doing in this film is, if you see the diffraction patterns here, the morphology or the crystallinity of the lead iodide which has formed by using this precursor compositions has been decreasing with increase in the precursor compositions. So this decrease in the crystallinity shows that the PBI2 morphology is loosening up. It is creating some more space so that the MAI can be intercalated in the structure and the better perovskite can be formed in this case. If you see from the atomic force microscopic images, the lead iodide, which is pure and doesn't have any lead nitrate concentrations, shows a roughness of around 3 to 4 nanometers, whereas this perovskite shows a roughness of around 30 to 35 nanometers. So here, if the roughness of the PBI2 is better, then it will have a more active sites so that the MAI can penetrate better in the structure PBI2 structure, and it can give a better convergence. If you see in the texture analysis, the texture of this film is having lot of ups and downs, which shows a lot of active sites to be present from the different directions for the conversion. This lead nitrate, what it is doing to change this kind of morphology? Generally, if you use lead nitrate with MAI, it doesn't directly converts into the MePBI3. It also goes through an intermediate phase change. So it's like, first, if you use lead nitrate with MAI, it has some PBI2, it forms the PBI2, and then that PBI2 under MAI forms the MePBI3. So this is also again an exchange reaction kind, which takes a little bit time and gives sufficient time to have this kind of morphology. We have prepared the perovskite from these precursor composition lead iodide morphology, and we came to understand that the 70-30 ratio films gives a very good morphology as compared to pure PBI2 film. If you see the grain size distribution here, the perovskite in the pure case is having grain size of around 200 to 50 nanometers, but here the grain size has been increased to 600-700 nanometers. Even some grains are ranging to 1 micrometers also. If you further increase the concentration of the lead nitrate, then it starts deteriorating the morphology again. It's because of that the more the concentration of lead nitrate, it starts forming the chunks in the perovskite structure. So it is like 70-30 ratio is the optimized ratio for this process, where we can get a very good quality of the perovskite film, a very compact film with a very less number of pinholes. We have done then some scanning microscopic images, and if you see here, the perovskite film which is prepared at 70-30 composition has a very good fluorescence. If you see at this scale, it shows a very high fluorescence, whereas in this case there are so many dark spots in this case. So the fluorescence has been increased, and the overall fluorescence density also has increased significantly as compared to the pure PBI2 phase. And if you further increase the composition amount of lead nitrate, then it again gives deterioration in the morphology, and we lose some fluorescence in the film due to non-radiative recombinations. Not only the increase in the performance, the precursor composition also give a homogeneity in the emission. If you see the perovskite film which is prepared from pure PBI2, although it shows some bright spots, but this is not homogeneous throughout the film. It has some points like number 1, 2 points where there are dark spots like it shows that either there is non-radiative recombination happening there through some defects, or there is incomplete surface coverage. But if you see the spot number 3 and 4, which are bright in illuminations, so it's like some grains are illuminating very bright. And this is because that these grains may not have a connection with the nearby grains. So what happens is, when you shine the light on this film, the charge carriers are generated in these grains, but the charge carriers are not able to diffuse in the nearby grains. So if it is not able to diffuse, it will be confined within the grain, and when the recombination is happening, it will be a perfect recombination and gives a very good luminescence. Like if you see in the intensity range, this is some bright spots are covering a range of 250. But this kind of illumination, this kind of emission from the perovskite film is not a very favorable conditions, because of the disconnectivity in the grains. If you use the hole transporting materials and electron transporting extraction materials from on this PBI2 film, this will provide a lot of shunting parts, and the charge carriers will not be able to extract it from here. But in case of 70-30 ratio film, this gives a very good homogeneity in the perovskite film. Although we saw that there is some difference, that this part is a little bit less bright and this part is more bright, that may be due to some kind of electronic disorders present in the film, but which can be resolved even after some optimization processes. So with this process, we understood that PBI2 surface morphology has a very important role in governing the perovskite morphology. If you have a very good perovskite, PBI2 morphology, then it will lead to a more better performing perovskite and more stable perovskite. So reviewing some conclusion points, we understood that the perovskite film properties are fabrication route dependent. If you use different kind of perovskite, there will be difference in the properties, and there will be difference in the degradation routes as well. We understood that the crystal orientation of the perovskite has a very important role in governing the degradation mechanism. If you use 100 kind of crystal orientation, then methylammonium on the top, and it will degrade faster. We understood that the two-step route is having little robustness toward the moisture ingress and provides a very stable, comparatively stable perovskite. We understood that the PBI2 morphology has a significant role in governing the perovskite structure. And if you have a PBI2 with higher surface roughness, it can provide more active sites to perovskite conversion. We understood that if you add a 70-30 volumetric ratio of PBI2 and lead nitrate, it gives a significant boost to the optoelectronic properties. So with these combination, we understood that take a two-step route, take a nitrate precursor composition, or change the PBI2 morphology by temperature changes, and you can get a stable perovskite as compared to the other methods. At last, I would like to acknowledge my supervisor, Professor Sandeep Pathak, in IIT Delhi, and some of my lab mates. And I would like to acknowledge the Sunrise Indo-UK program and the Department of Science and Technology for providing the funding, and Nanoscale Research Facility and Central Research Facility of IIT Delhi for providing the fabrication and the characterization methods. Thank you, audience. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Banu, for delivering such a wonderful lecture. Participants, now the floor is open for questions.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
You have calculate viscosity of the liquid using spin coating method.
Sorry, your voice is not clear, sir.
Can you calculate the viscosity of the liquid using spin method? Your composition.
Spin coating method is just to deposit the film. The viscosity can be calculated for the solution, but not from the spin coating method. For calculation of the viscosity, you have to use some other technique called viscosity meter to calculate the viscosity of the solution. Spin coating method is only for the deposition of the film.
Okay, I know spin coating is a deposition of the film. but your
Yes.
aging time is not hello.
Hello. Yes. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Your aging time is not proportionate to one. How much you calculate?
Is the solution
How you calculate the solution? Aging.
aging? Sir, we are not using any aging in the solution. The aging we are using in perovskite films. We are preparing the solution and immediately we are depositing the solution on the perovskite film. We are not doing any aging with the solution. If you see in my presentation, I think there is the aging is done in the perovskite film to calculate the degradation. It's aging of the perovskite film to calculate the degradation, not the aging of the perovskite solution.
Aging factor determines which parameter?
Sir, aging factor will determine the crystal, the formation of colloids in the solutions. If you use, like we have done in some other experiments, which I have not reported here. In last of my slides, I used lead nitrate as the precursor composition change parameters. So if you use PbI2 and lead nitrate and keep the solution for aging, then there will be colloid formation in the solution itself, and that colloid formation will further improve the perovskite morphology. So if you keep the solution for aging, it can improve the performance further. So this is how the aging parameter can help the perovskite morphology. But we have not done aging for our precursor solutions. We have done aging only for this one, only for perovskite films, which is used for degradation. Here, aging means the degradation. Aging means the keeping the film outside the environment so that it has sufficient time so that moisture can attack the film.
Thank you.
I hope I'm clear, sir. I hope I'm clear, sir.
Yes, clear.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yeah, the presentation was very informative, sir. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So regarding the procedure, have you tried using tin? The same.
No. Yes, we have been trying in this replacing the lead with some other factors like using tin, using bismuth also in our laboratory. But there are some problems by using tin. That first is the oxidation state of tin. Tin actually has two oxidation states. If you see, it shows +2 and +4 oxidation states. What we use here is a +2 oxidation state for perovskite structure formation. The problem is whenever you are keeping the perovskite after preparation, the tin try to oxidize in +4 state, first problem. And the second problem is the tin has very good tendency to form the oxides. So it forms sometimes SnO2 also. So these are the two problems which we are facing, which generally all the people who are working on the tin-based perovskites are facing these problems. So that reduces the performance of the lead this perovskite as well.
Okay, sir. So is there any method to suppress this oxidation, like the transition from oxidation state 2 to 4 in the case of tin?
The oxidation state of tin is its inherent property. So oxidation states cannot be changed. But what we can do is to make it more stable, some part of, we cannot use the tin as complete replacement. What we can do is use some part of tin and some part of lead. So the structure can be made more sustainable and it can reduce some kind of oxidation process of tin. But inherently Sn+2 and +4 you cannot change because it's inherent property. But you can use some lead portion so that you can make a good perovskite and reduce the probability of getting oxidized.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, please post your mail ID.
Mail ID is there in the last slide, sir.
Last slide.
Any other questions?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Very nice presentation, sir. one question I have means how to reduce this degradation mechanism, means how we can avoid this degradation. Means I have studied some papers where 2D perovskite actually used. Sir, any other method we can means introduce for reduce degradation?
Yes, there are several methods to reduce the degradation and increase the stability of the perovskite. If you see here, there are three components basically. You have methyl ammonium, lead, and iodine. Methyl ammonium is very hygroscopic. So first option is you change the methyl ammonium itself. So what you suggested, the 2D perovskite comes from this thing. If you change the methyl ammonium with some larger cation atoms, like you increase this methyl ammonium is basically CH3NH2 CH3NH2 or CH3NH3 plus. So instead of taking CH3, you take CH3 CH3 CH2 NH2. It's a long chain polymer. Okay, so what it will do is it will have a static hindrance towards the moisture, so that it can avoid some degradation. But the problem with this one is it forms a 2D structure, and once it forms a 2D structure, the optoelectronic properties are being compromised. So 2D structures, as you suggested, has a good stability, but its performance are lower. Other than this, what you can do is you can change the iodine also. If you put Br in combination with iodine, it is more stable as compared to this one. And the most general solution which is followed to avoid the degradation is the encapsulations. Like what we do for food, like to avoid food from getting bad, we used to cover it with something. The same kind of process has been followed here. If you do the encapsulation of the perovskite, you can make the perovskite stay longer.
Sir, encapsulation means what kind of encapsulation, sir?
So yes, there are so many encapsulants available, like some polymer materials are available. So when you are making the perovskite here, on the top of this complete perovskite structure, you use some hydrophobic element. You use some hydrophobic element here, so that it can hinder the moistures to ingress into the perovskite. When if you use here something which is having a hydrophobic property, then it won't allow the moisture to penetrate to this one. Second thing is, in the HTL material, generally people use is spiro-omitted. So instead of spiro-omitted, if you use carbon-based, like as discussed in the last presentation by Priyanka, if you use carbon-based perovskite, or if you use molybdenum oxide, which is organic, then also you can increase the stability.
Sir, another question. Sorry, sir. Sir, could we use, like when we are using hydrophobic long chain perovskite instead of methyl ammonium, could we use methyl ammonium along with that hydrophobic long chain? Means
Yes, you can
mixture
use.
of this.
Yes, you can use. People are using the mixture, instead, and only taking instead of Ma, they are using MaFa or Ma with some other long chain polymer. It's like how the suitability is governed by the tolerance factor. You should be keeping in mind that the tolerance factor should be in the range, and it should have a good optoelectronic properties. So up to the point it is sustaining the optoelectronic properties, you can make the mixture. But yes, you can make the mixture also.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Hello, sir. Thank you for this informative talk.
Thank you.
Sir, actually, I had a question about the graph shown on slide 17.
70.
Yes, sir. Actually, there are few kinks like peaks and.
Okay. Yes.
You can see there are some
You're talking about this thing?
peaks. Yeah, sir. On the other side as well.
This one also?
Around after 100 hours after a bit.
Okay.
So there is this interesting dip, and on other side there is some this peak between 50 and 0. So do they have any significant interpretation, sir, according to you?
Yes, some peaks are having significance. Like if you see here in this region, the peaks which is below 50, there is
Yes,
a
sir.
increase in all the peaks. So what happens is when you age the perovskite, when you take the perovskite and keep it in the moisture environment for initial some time, the perovskite performance actually improves. What happens is
Okay.
when you force the perovskite, there will be some kind of unreacted methyl ammonium iodide which will be staying there at the grain boundaries. Okay, and some kind of defects which will be present in the perovskite. So when you keep it for some time in the H2O environment, it will start the MEI, which is residual MEI, which is in the excess, it starts evaporating. So once it is evaporating, it's like passivation of the grain boundaries. So for that purpose, initially a little bit improvement of the enhancement, improvement in the properties will come. But this reason is just a measurement artifact. If you see, it is there in everywhere. It's just a measurement
Yes, sir.
artifact. We have tried it for several devices also. It is coming in every device. So it's just for measurement artifact. It's not, nothing has to do with it.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Any other doubts from the participants?
Sir, I have one doubt.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Suppose if I want to increase the stability of the perovskite solar cell, can we change the thickness of the layer? Is it possible?
You mean perovskite layer?
Yeah.
Yes, you can change the thickness, but it won't help much, because once the moisture has been reached to the perovskite film, then it won't take much long to degrade the perovskite. It's like if you have more thickness, it will take a little bit of higher time to degrade. I mean, like suppose if you are taking 10 days to degrade the efficiency from 15% to 8%, it will take 17 days or 18 days, a little bit higher time to degrade the perovskite efficiency, because already with the higher thickness of perovskite, your efficiency will be a little bit higher side, and it will take a little bit of extra time, but it won't add much of the significance in improving the stability of the perovskite.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, thank you very much for the nice presentation, sir. Sir, actually, my question is regarding the electron transporting layer, sir. So usually the conventional TiO2 is used as the electron transporting layer. So whether we can replace by tin oxide, sir. So many reports are available, and your opinion on TiO2 as well as tin oxide.
Okay, so you mean you want to try replacing the TiO2 with SnO2, right?
Yes, sir.
So this is what I have done in this here. I have used in this film. I have used TiO2, whereas in my second, if you go for this method which I have shown, I have used SnO2 as well here. You can replace TiO2 with SnO2. The next competitive material for replacement of TiO2 is SnO2 only. And the reason why we are going from TiO2 to SnO2 is that TiO2 is a very strong photocatalyst. So when you expose the perovskite device under sunlight, you know that the sunlight has the UV part as well. So that UV part is exposed by the titanium dioxide, and the titanium dioxide acts as a photocatalyst, and it starts eating up the perovskite itself. So this is the process, and it helps in degrading the perovskite. So this is the reason why people are shifting from TiO2 to SnO2.
Okay. Okay, sir. Because I'm also working on the tin oxide based electron transporting layer, so that's why.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
Thank you
that's
very
good.
much, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other queries? Bhanu, there are some queries in the chat box. Can I just narrate the questions for you so that you can answer that?
Yes, you can.
There's a question from P. Venkatesh. He is asking that what will be the reason for the steep decrease in PCE of PSC through lead chloride route in the initial hours, and then it seems to be increased.
Okay, so initially what happens is when the moisture comes into the picture with lead chloride route, the power, the first for very less time, the efficiency should increase. But what happens is the degradation process of lead chloride is very fast. So once the moisture is coming into the picture, immediately it is converting into the hydrate phase. So once the hydrate phase is formed, hydrate phase is, if you have seen in my slide, I'll just give you the example here. इसमें last minute if you see this, it's like when you have the water molecule intact in your film, First thing is there will be very less perovskite available. Second is it has formed already a double hydrate. So this phase is not at all photoactive phase. This has no photoactivity in terms of governing the solar cell performance. So first thing is absorption is very less. Second thing is this doesn't contribute in photoactivity. So it will be detrimenting the performance within a few hours. I hope I am clear.
Okay, the other question is from M. Venkatesh. He is asking if he is adding some dopant on the main material, whether the lattice parameter is decreases or increases.
It depends on the size of the dopant material. For example, if you go for some bigger cation, then there will be decrease in the there will be increase in the size of the structure. And if you go for a smaller cation or a smaller anion, then there will be a reduction. It depends on the size or ionic radii of the components.
Okay, there's another question from Subham. He is asking that degradation of PSA is mainly due to moisture and air. So why not vacuum seal the solar module?
Yes, people are doing the vacuum sealing also. This is also an option for encapsulations. And the degradation is not because of air, it's because of mainly moisture.
There's another question from Sachidanand. He is asking, can we replace Ma with some inorganic cation for two-step formation PSC?
Yes, we can increase the people have reported the chains of the replacement of Ma with cesium and rubidium also. Okay. But sometimes it gives a instability in the structure, so people are using some kind of combination of A side cation.
Okay, there's another question from Kiran KS. He's asking gold ischemic tolerance ratio of lead chloride and lead acetate perovskite. What is the gold ischemic tolerance ratio of lead chloride and lead acetate perovskite?
Gold means you are talking about the counter electrode?
Basically, I don't
because
understand.
Gold has the tolerance factor of perovskite structure.
Yes. So the tolerance factor of you want to ask like what will be the tolerance factor of the perovskite if I use gold, right?
No, he is asking the tolerance ratio of lead chloride and lead acetate perovskite.
Goldsmith tolerance ratio.
Okay, Goldsmith tolerance factor you want to ask for lead chloride and this one. So lead chloride is it is very close to 1. It's almost 1. And for lead acetate and two-step route, it is close to 0.9, 0.92, 0.93 like that.
There is another question from Subham. He is asking how you come to the idea of gradual increasing the annealing.
Okay, this is an optimization process that we have used. We have put it directly under at a high temperature from 100 degree, 150 degree, and we see that there is not much morphology change and morphology is reducing. So this came with some of the optimization process. We have done a lot of trials, and then finally we reached to this conclusion that we should increase it gradually and then we should reduce it. And even if you see also, if you give a gradual increase, it will have sufficient time for the grains to expand. And if you immediately give a higher temperature, then there will be so much of strain located at the grain boundaries. It will be, like so much of pressure you are giving to something immediately. So it won't be that much useful.
Okay, there's another question from Karthik Raja. He is asking, is it any light-induced degradation absorbed in your work?
No, we have not done this light-induced degradation mechanism. And the only light introduction that we have used is for calculation of this photovoltaic parameters, which is a very slight amount of time that won't cause that much of degradation through light.
There's another question is by improving the annealing process to 200 Celsius, absorbance is increased to what extent? Quantitatively.
Actually, this process of making a forming the perovskite is not. It depends on the reproducibility as well. So here, the increase in the absorption is not that much. So what you do is, if you have a perovskite film, if you see in this one, yeah, if you have a perovskite film which is if you have a perovskite film which has complete conversion into perovskite from lead iodide, okay, then it won't show a very significant increase. If you talk about the quantitatively, I cannot comment on any quantitative number, because it varies from one film to the another film. Even a human error or a machine error or solution error, anything can contribute to some change, but there is no significant number, but definitely yes, it will improve.
There is a question from Minakshi Sundaram. He is asking, aging time is not proportionate. So how you have correlated one another?
Aging time is proportionate for all the films. If we have the only reason this question came is, I'll just show you why this question has came up. If you see this film, the aging time is proportionate. The only thing is, I have not indicated the values, the observations which I've taken at 4 hours, 8 hours, 20, like that for these two, because there was no significant difference, or it was too much of data points for these two, but which was not having any significant value. So I have not used those data points here, but I have used the data points here. But the aging time is same throughout the fall. We have taken at the same aging point, same aging time, we have taken all the characterizations for all the films.
Okay. There's another question is, what absorber material are used by the industry companies worldwide working in perovskite solar cells?
So it's a combination of A-cation mixtures like methyl ammonium, formidinium, and cesium, and a combination of halogens like iodine and bromine. So the combination of A-cation as well as the combination of anions is generally used because it shows a better performance.
Okay. There is a question from Ramchandran. He is asking, MAPBI3 spin coating after use any anti-solvent, dichlorobenzene or toluene for crystallinity improvement?
Yes, you can use that for crystallinity improvement. What the benzene, dichlorobenzene, or toluene, these are non-polar solvents. So the non-polar solvents will not have any impact on the perovskite morphology, because it cannot degrade the perovskite, because it's non-polar in nature. It's obvious. So if you use it, what will happen is, if there is any excess amount of methyl ammonium iodide which is present on the surface of the perovskite, that can be washed off and the perovskite performance can be improved.
There's a last question from Govind Raja. He is asking, what is the device area you use to measure the IV?
It's 0.09 centimeters square.
That's all from the chat section questions. I think there is no further doubt left. Is there any doubt from the participants? Since there is no further doubt, then let's just thank our speaker. Thank you, Bhanu. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. And participants, you are requested to cooperate for our other sessions, which will be held in upcoming months or in end of this month. The links will be shared you accordingly. And thank you all for attending today's event. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.